me get this down here.
All right. And we are back. So, episode 3 of our senior capstone project. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Thomas. You guys go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Joe Brewington.
Got Alan Brea back at it again.
And we're 3 USF students going through our senior capstone project. We are doing the 8th global goal, which is decent work and economic growth. The target is 8.6, promoting youth in employment, education, and training. So today we're going over education, and we have an interview that we like to react to and go over the information shared. So Joe, if you will introduce the person and then share the interview with us.
Absolutely. So this is Paula McQuillan. Paula McQuillan was or is a retired school teacher from Hillsborough County Public Schools. She taught 6th, 7th, 8th, and a little bit of high school, but mostly it was middle school that she taught. So I thought it was appropriate. She taught for 37 years. She won Teacher of the Year in Hillsborough County 11 times and won Teacher of the Year in the state of Florida 3 times. So she's a highly qualified educator, and I had an excellent conversation with her, and we have some pretty interesting things to show you guys on her viewpoints on educating our youth and preparing them for either vocational or secondary education, and preparing them for the workforce to be, via either the route of vocational schooling or learning a trade or going to college. So the first question is, stand by, sorry. All right, the first question would be, what were some of the ways you prepared our youth or her students for a transition into a decision towards either secondary school or vocational school? And here's what she had to say.
What are some of the ways you prepared our youth or your students for a transition into the decision towards a secondary education?
Usually through for secondary education, I'm assuming you're thinking about
College.
high school or college.
Yeah.
College, primarily college. Yeah. Okay. First of all, if they enjoyed, I really looked at that factor, enjoyed what they were doing inside the classroom, and what that individual student was curious about. And I tried really hard, since I'm a female and was kind of, in the sciences, and the sciences were somewhat low, in numbers as far as science and mathematics. I would, go into, believe it or not, I wasn't told to do this, but looking at females in that regard, curiosity and interest in and different ethnicities. I kind of applied those same techniques to even children of more wealth and opportunities. So, but I really honed in on, if possible, their curiosities, and if they were interested in it, and if they felt comfortable in asking questions. And because that was very important, because when they got to college, especially in the field of sciences and math, and that's what I was in. Yeah. So that's where I tended to. So if I felt like they were going into some other area, how did those same skills of curiosity apply to if they were tended to be writers, as far as English goes, or history, majors, how were their writing skills, or if they were really listening to answers and the ability to ask questions so that people would, could respond. So I tried to extend it out also to other disciplines if possible, but my main thrust, of course, was the mathematics and science. But, not everybody loves that. So
some of the things you'd look for would be like, just strengths and writing skills, and kind of if they had an interest in the sciences and math, that you would kind of push them a little harder to develop their skills.
Yeah, and some of course scientific writing is a little different than other writing, so it's almost like a different style for of language in a way in the scientific area.
Yeah.
But you know, any any writing that was uh understandable, and sometimes in middle school, you know, they think a sentence is a good sentence and it really isn't. I don't care if it's scientific or not. I'm not trying to be sarcastic here, but they, you know, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this sentence. Does it make sense? You know, when you wrote down what the results were, you know, does this sentence make sense? Or do you see where you left off important information?
Yeah.
Okay, so that would apply to all disciplines. You know,
Yeah.
is what you wrote down really getting your point across in a understandable way for others? Because in science, you share your results.
Right.
Okay, you're looking at you know, repeatable results if possible, or you know, safety problems, whatever. But you're trying to express yourself, you know, well,
Yeah.
which I'm not doing very well orally here. But the point is,
All right.
but yeah, but even orally, you know, how they uh, develop their questions, you know, orally, not only writing. So
It's
when
kind
you
of
say
developing
writing,
critical
mathematics, or
thinking, too.
science, yeah, when you say writing and math and science, there's an, you know, orally, you want them to be able to be clear too, so that you're presenting, you know, you're express your whatever you want, the information that you want, you know, the person can latch on to understanding of it. So it could be oral, could be written. Yeah.
So that's the first question. I think she made a bunch of good points, and I think what she was trying to say was that she kind of analyzes how they communicate, specifically in writing. Her focus was she was a science and math teacher for a long time, so her focuses were she did a lot of lab work. You know, you remember back in the day, you had the Bunsen burners and all that stuff in your high school classes and middle school classes, and she would do a lot of that. But she was talking about how she would analyze their writing skills and see if they were listening, and kind of the point she was trying to make was, were they developing those skills and kind of moving down the path towards like something that's legible versus people who really struggled. And I think that was part of how she identified that those candidates for secondary education.
Yeah, I think another thing she
Absolutely.
emphasized on was I think another thing she emphasized on was trying to find out what they enjoyed learning. I think everyone has an interest in learning something, so kind of finding out what that is and kind of encouraging that, pushing them forward to take that next step is kind of important because not everyone's going to be trying to learn the exact same thing. Now, I think that's kind of what school is. You kind of want to learn what you want. Like that's what, you know, elementary, middle school, high school is. You want to learn kind of like what you plan to do in the future, what you want to learn in the future.
Yeah.
Then you can kind of find that through college.
Yeah, and a little bit later on in the interview, she gets a little bit more in depth on how she focuses on that. So we'll get to that too. But the next question I believe was I skipped around a little bit, but what are some of the challenges that she faced with underachieving students or underachieving parents? And this is what she had to say about that.
So, what were some of the challenges that you faced with underachieving students with overachieving parents?
Um, Underachieving students with overachieving parents. That's very interesting. Um, some of the obstacles were that no, my child can't possibly be underachieving. That was, you know, that I heard that
Denial,
phrase.
not just a
Yeah, yeah. And so what I did was, and your question again was, what were some of my
what were the
strategies
challenges
working
you
for them?
faced? Yeah,
Uh,
with
okay,
basically with the parents when you see a
okay.
student that's under.
As soon as I sensed where that parent was coming from, um, and that takes a lot of listening as a teacher. It's tough to do. As soon as I sensed where they were coming from, I would try very hard to build on that, and say, you know, let's take d- d- let's take a look. I want you to take a look at some of the concrete examples of what we're discussing, his writing skills or mathematics, you know, whatever. like that, or
So sort
behavioral
out
too,
facts.
or behavioral too.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let's get some examples that I've seen in the classroom. And of course, usually they said, not my kid, and so you know, but I tried to be as very specific to the incidences or the production, the piece of written material, or the problems in the mathematics as possible. And, and just say, and I was lucky because I was available to do some tutoring after school,
Yeah.
sometimes voluntary, sometimes paid, but, but, but maybe I could contact even, I would tell them, say, well, let me talk with the math teacher a little bit, and see if maybe he can hone in on this particular area. I will too. But if basically it was really making them comfortable hearing some discord,
Yeah.
from what they were assuming, because and and how I got to do that was I had always taught in high risk for about 50% of my career, and then in upper income for 50% of my career. So believe it or not, the skills of listening uh, were even, and making your point across was harder even with the
What
upper
would you say was more
income.
challenging, working in a more high risk school,
Um,
or because that's an interesting point you make. Because I'm
yeah.
wondering, did you find it more challenging in one or the other?
Well, for me, it was more challenging in the upper income level
Mhm.
schools than the higher risk, because the parents actually, and I've heard that a lot of people had trouble getting parents even coming to the school, or even conversing, because so many times they were like embarrassed about their own knowledge, and they thought that they had to be
Right.
smart or whatever. But I didn't have that problem. And so I was able to, and I also had a little Spanish background because most of the areas I did for high risk had, double language. But my point being that they wanted their kid to do well. Most of the children, the parents wanted their children to do well. Once I made them feel comfortable, uh, you know, that I was there to help them, not to judge them.
Right. They didn't feel threatened.
Whereas in the upper income group, they were more sensitive to being judged. Their
Interesting.
kid was representing them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So basically, if their kid wasn't a superstar in South Tampa, whatever area I was teaching, and that had that characteristic, um, they thought that as an extension of themselves, so they would become very protective. So you had to be. There was so to me that fine line was very difficult. Now my principals loved it because I had that background where I would listen more.
Right.
Okay. And I wasn't necessarily friends with these people in the neighborhood like most of the teachers that were my
Right.
teachers here. So I actually sometimes, I used to give principals, I say, I'll give it 2 years to see if I can, cut this. Because if the parents were going to pressure you into giving the child a higher grade, or, he's really a good kid, blah, 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 that, it really, I felt like, I'll give it 2 years. And most of the time, it worked out really well. I stayed, and they were happy that I stayed because there weren't that many teachers with that background that I had.
Right.
Not that I was so wonderful, but they didn't have the background that I had with all kinds of kids, all kinds of disabilities.
And I think,
That I didn't have a problem with working with kids with disability or kids with behavioral problems.
and I think you
So
hit something with the listening too, because and also the approach, like not so aggressively in the parent's face, but really just being objective and showing the objective evidence of, if you had a difficult student and their parents came in and they're in denial, then you're showing objective evidence that this is what's happening in the class, and this is what we need to work on to make your child a better student. And I think with difficult parents, especially in the upper class neighborhoods and students, that the difficulty is to get them to accept the fact that the child is struggling because maybe they're successful, right? Or financially, air quotes, successful. And their expectation for their kid is, well, not my kid because I'm a lawyer and, or I'm a, whatever. And I think that's a good point that you make because one of the things that I've learned.
I think I kind of ramble on a little bit here, but I think the point that she was trying to make is, especially, I liked how she was talking about the different areas, especially when she did half her career in more challenged neighborhoods and other half of your career more, prominent neighborhoods. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the geographic kind of thing, but South Tampa is kind of notorious for higher property rates, higher class, whatever definition, of citizens that make higher incomes and are generally in the doctor, lawyer kind of categories. And I think it was interesting what she said was that she had more challenges with the parents, with people in the higher income brackets, because they had a higher expectation, like my kid's not doing that, there's no way. And with the more middle or lower class incomes, she was the parents were generally more open to feedback and really not necessarily care more, but showed more interest in the child and their development because I don't know why, because we didn't really kind of talk about why she thought that was, but she felt like they were more involved. And the kids had more engagement than, I guess, the more privileged children. And I think she said that was a bigger challenge, developing them and getting them ready for like college and things like that. So
Definitely. Well, she had mentioned like the kids being like a representation of the parents and how the parents would be more involved in that case. And that kind of resonated with me because growing up, I mean, we're in a more lower income type of family. And I remember from elementary, middle, and high that my parents would be like, you represent us when you leave the house. That goes at school, that goes how you address adults, all that kind of stuff. So I think you take more ownership and accountability as a parent and as a child, knowing that your parents look to you as an extension of themselves. As when she mentioned like the upper income, like the parents weren't really as involved as much. So I could see how that would be a challenge as a teacher to kind of get through to the family if they're not really around to be receptive to that kind of information,
yeah, and I think she also said that a lot of times she presented, one of the interesting things she said was the way she communicated was the same through whatever ethnicity or income bracket or what have you that she had with whatever student it was, right? And I thought that was extremely intelligent of her, and that's probably one of the reasons why she was such a successful and awarded teacher, because she had a gift, as you guys can tell. She has a gift of communication. She is very good at communicating her thoughts, and I think that is very relatable to all people. And I think that's why she was such a successful teacher, because she was so relatable to all kinds of different children from all kinds of different backgrounds. And I think that's important. Personally, I believe that's important for the development of a child, because, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but I know that through my scholastic career when I was a kid, I think back at some of the teachers that I had, the ones that really made an impact on me to really improve my self-worth, my thought patterns on how I'm developing as a person, were the ones that were really engaged and communicated with me, not the ones that were just like show up to work, give you the lesson and leave. You know what I mean? The ones that really showed interest in you and interest in your parents and interest in your background. And she was really good at that and is very good at that. And I think that's an important point for educating our youth and preparing them for the workforce, is that engagement, because that's going to be important in all aspects, especially with us in our major, right? It's communication. And I think that is a huge factor and kind of a highlight in this interview, where she really kind of emphasized her communication skills, whether it was with other teachers or with students. So I thought that was important.
Yeah, no, I'd say kind of the overall theme of that question was uh how do the students or parents take criticism? And part of learning is being wrong at some point. Like you never learn if you're always right. So it's kind of
Great
like
point.
it's a humbling experience, but it has to happen in order to learn. So it was interesting how she said the upper income, uh, the higher class didn't really take the correction well. Um, and how, kind of like she said, and you guys said that the parents view them like their kids as an extension of themselves. And I think, Joe, you mentioned in the interview that most people can't accept the fact that their kid's struggling. And obviously, you want to see your kid succeed, but like, if there is something that needs to be addressed, why wouldn't you do the best you can to give them the opportunity to success? Like that's an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to get better. Failure shouldn't be this daunting thing. Like failure is what creates success, honestly. So,
That's a
because
great
you just
point.
find out what doesn't work, so you
Right,
take a different route.
right. And why do we fall off the horse? So we can get back on, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of a great point. Like most people look at failure as exactly that, and it's a learning opportunity. And the more that you the more you fail, the more you're successful. And even Michael Jordan said it. He was like, I learned, I'm great because of my failures and all the things that I did wrong. And the people that become elite in this world are the ones that truly embrace that. And I think that's an important fact. So that's a great comment.
Plus, this is completely opinion based, but I feel like you can't really understand what success is without seeing failure. Because if you're just
Great.
successful your whole life, you don't really see the other side of it ever.
I think there's something in the struggle too, right? Like you
Yeah.
learn in that struggle. And I think that if somebody, and this is kind of goes back to the point of privilege, right? Like if you come up in a house, and I can't speak to that because I grew up in a lower middle class family as well. And I mean, I didn't want for anything, but there were times where I went without, right? And I think that shows in my adult life more appreciation for the art of earning that. And I think part of that is success and failure and how you deal with that. And I think sports was a great example of that because you don't always win in sports. And I think that's kind of a good example of losing and then learning from those lessons. But I think the most important thing is that the mindset that you have, right, with failure is extremely important because I know that I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for all the mistakes and failures that I made early in life. Like I've learned from those mistakes and do not repeat them. I try to teach that to my kid as well. And when you're younger, that frontal cortex is not that frontal lobe that you learn in your kind of reasoning and thought patterns, especially for men and boys, I should say, that are growing up. It doesn't develop until your mid 20s. So when you're 18, 19, you're not really in a mental position to make those decisions. So those are the kind of the periods where you're making those mistakes and learning from them. And then when you get to be a little older, you're like, let me not repeat that. So I think that's a
Right.
great point, Thomas.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I do have one more. Do you want to go through
Real
one
quick,
more?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
go
do
ahead,
one
Tom.
more.
Go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
how do I have a quick tidbit I want to add. Similar to your point with sports, I think there's a huge difference maker, and it seems like Miss Paula is one of those difference makers with having an instructor or coach that cares, right? So when it comes to growth and advancement in a sport, education, you feel encouraged and you feel the difference when it comes from a place of authenticity, so to speak. And Miss Paula mentioned how she listens, whether you're how you're covering, because of your background, that she's open to listening. And I think, I don't know, that makes a difference in the student's eyes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the biggest impacts, and I think we talked about this maybe on off kind of keel when we talk, but one of the biggest impact makers in my life as a direction when I was a kid going into, because I didn't even think I was going to go to college. My coach pulled me aside and was like, I see you with those people over at the store. Like, you shouldn't be hanging out with those people. You're better than that. You need to work harder. You need to figure out your schooling. You need to get better grades. And that was really a pivotal moment in my life where I could have gone either direction, right? I could have gone with the bad crowd or the good crowd. And he kind of centered me and gave me, this kind of boost in my ego, I guess, or boost to my self-esteem, where it made me feel like, yeah, I can do it. And I think that's important, especially for young kids. And if you're not getting it from home, you got to get it somewhere. And I think coaches are a big part of
Absolutely.
that, because I think that they are obviously they're a huge influence, right? You look at your coach, you're like, that's my coach. You know what I mean? Like I played for Bobby
Yeah.
Bowden, and Bobby Bowden was one of the winningest coaches in the history of college football, and I had no desire to go any other place. I wanted to play for him, and at the end of the day, you look at him as a figure, and you're like, that's Bobby Bowden. But if he said something to you, you freaking listened, you know. And I think that's a great point, Alan.
Yeah, it really is all about guidance too. Like when you're a kid, you're gonna take things in. You're gonna take a lot more things to heart than you would, when you're older. Because I mean, you're at the most vulnerable state in your life. Because any guidance you have is gonna guide you one way or the other. And so obviously you want to lead you in the proper and right direction. So
Yeah.
having good teachers, having good coaches that kind of encourage you to stay on that path and just overall kind of build up your future. That's it's pretty crucial to just your personal development.
So you said you want to do one more. Well, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit because the question 5 is kind of a three-parter. I think that'll be better for the next one. But this one, I believe, is what are some of the biggest challenges you face when educating our youth? Let's hear what she has to say about that. Give
Okay.
me 2 moments here.
Do you think that most students understand the importance of education for them specifically? Do you think that at least the ones that do you think they're just oblivious until they get down to the last minute, like most young people? They just don't think about it? Or do you think most students understand how important education is for them?
Oh, okay. Oh, well, you know something? Um, I would say about 70, if I was going to put a number on it, here's this mathematics and science. If I was going to put a number on it, I'd say about 75% thought that education was very, very important. About 25%, maybe like 10% were wishy-washy, they could go either way. But there was a good 10% that, as far as they were concerned, they were just biding time until they graduated, and whether they were going to go into something nefarious or whether they were going to have someone support them, and they didn't really care about, either their education or work. Uh, and either work, I'm talking about both of them, education or work,
Right.
was going to be very important. Okay, the skills for work or the skills that were necessary to attain, an educational level that might bring more opportunities. So,
Do you think there's
so
an
there
age
was,
level?
there was about 75% that really valued it.
Do you think there's a specific grade level or age level that a student should start thinking about that stuff? I mean, do you think it's in high school? Do you think it's before? What's
Oh
your
no,
experience?
I think talking, and exposing kids to whether it's their parents' work or family uh, work, or employments, the different ones. I think that it's important to start uh, maybe as low as sixth grade or fifth grade, as far as bringing that up. And this is from a personal experience.
Yeah.
My father, and I'll share this with you real quickly.
Okay.
My father used to take me on purpose to see what he was doing. He was a salesman, and he originally did by car. Okay, he drove around. So he would take me with him, and I would see how he would communicate with cold call sales,
Yeah.
sales with people that he already knew. So I was pretty young. I'm talking about like 10 or 11.
Wow.
And that helped me. Yep, secretaries that he had to go through to get to the main guy, or go directly to the main guy, or to the working guy that he had to, speak with about his trade, whatever it was. And extremely valuable to see what my parents did. Now, if if your parents are not working, why is that happening in your household? In other words, or maybe something that's not so hot. Maybe your parent is a drug dealer. Maybe you got this stuff going on. How do you look at how does that make you feel being around that setup? Okay. And it's just as valuable as how does it make you feel around being what quote what we think are successful
Right.
employers or employees. All of that, how does that make you feel? And you can find that out pretty young. I mean, you can start that kind of introspection pretty young.
So I think that's an incredible insight to a teacher's mind. She said a lot there and very quickly, and we kind of dive into that a little bit more in the interview as far as like how she dealt with different parents. Again, like she was talking about kind of off the record. She was talking about how she had a student that she knew one of his parents was a drug dealer, and how she dealt with it. And she was telling that the kid was very introverted, like an introvert, like didn't talk a lot in class, kept his head down, and she kind of knew it. So she would kind of focus on that and kind of pull him out and then kind of pull him after class and talk to him and stuff. And I thought that was interesting. But what she's doing is she's kind of taking the time to figure out where the kid's coming from and learning about that kid, and then as early as possible, right? Because she was talking about 5th grade and 6th grade. I mean, that's young to think about high school, or excuse me, college or vocation. But she's like, you got to plant the seed, and I think that's important. And she's like, well, 75% of 100 value education. So that leaves a big chunk of people who don't give a crap about their education. So how do we reach those people? And that's kind of what she dove into a little bit, was identifying that. And how do we dive into that, 10% that really just doesn't care and get them to care? And that's a tough task to ask any of our teachers, especially the ones that are, in my opinion, underpaid, because you're asking a lot of these educators and they're not making a lot of money, which is going down a different road. But specifically talking about the kids, you're trying to develop our future, and then you're not contributing to the people who are developing our futures well-being as far as salaries are concerned. So that's kind of a whole different thing we can go down. But I think exposing what she was talking about was that she really thought that starting them early was an important tool to getting to develop them into a mindset of thinking about their future and thinking about transitioning into either secondary education or the workforce.
Yeah, I think when you're a kid, especially in like elementary and middle school, you're kind of just going through the motions. You're going to school because you have to, and you're doing your homework because you have to pass and stuff like that. You're probably not thinking at that rate, oh, I'm gonna plan for school, going to college 7 years from now, 8 years from now. But it's important to think of that, or at least, put that idea out there, because, I feel like most kids are at that age are just kind of like, well, I'm doing this just to do it, but I don't really know I don't know where this is exactly going.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it because I have to. So, kind of, I feel like sometimes as a kid you don't know what the purpose of it is, but when you see on the other end, this is how to sustain, a successful lifestyle, then it'll kind of encourage them to take a look at it a little bit further.
And that's a good point. I think that that you hit on something there, because I know from personal experience, I didn't really think about or quite honestly care about that aspect of my life. I was more focused on the now. And I knew people and had friends that were successful students. Not necessarily that I wasn't successful, but like we're talking about principal honor roll kind of honor students and AP classes and stuff. They were very focused on their grades because they knew it was going to impact their future. I didn't really care. I cared about the next day. I cared about going to school and meeting friends and, getting girlfriends and that type of thing. And I think it's important that we emphasize that. If I had a couple more teachers that emphasized the importance of that, maybe things would have been, different course.
For sure. I think in my personal experience as well, I was always slightly envious of those in high school that already had their plan mapped out and they already know what their trajectory was looking like ahead of time. Because similar to you, Joe, I was living in the now. I was on the day to day. I was hanging out with friends or doing whatever, and I wasn't really thinking long term. So I always felt a little bit, oh man, like jealous of the people that know what career path they want to be on already. Yes, I'm trying to figure it out.
For sure.
And it's almost like had I had that exposure young, like Miss Paula was talking about, maybe middle school, 6th, 7th grade, if I would have known, okay, what my options look like, that probably would put me on a path sooner than I would have liked, sooner than I ended up being on. So, yeah.
Yeah. Plus, I feel like it puts when you see other people have their path all set up and lined up, and you don't, it kind of puts pressure on you. Like, what am I doing? Like, these
Definitely.
people like know exactly what they want to do. I'm clueless.
Am I
But
successful
honestly,
because of it or
everyone,
not? That was kind of how I felt. Like I'm not
right?
successful because I don't have that. And I think it's important to not think that way. I think it's important to concentrate more on what is your path for you? What
Yeah.
is your path? And
Right.
I think if you look at other people and judge where you are based on where other people are, you're not gonna be successful because you're constantly measuring yourself to other people. You have to set your own goals and obtain your own goals, short, intermediate, and long-term goals, and think about that. What's important to you? I think we talked about that a little bit on our first podcast, right? First or second one
Yeah.
was that
Mhm.
it's important for high school or excuse me college students when they go in. What do I want to do? What major do I don't know what I want to do, and you lose focus. And like I think it was the second one because we were talking about Melanie and how they're 2-year degrees, and those are options for trade school and learning technical stuff, and that kind of focus. But I think that's an important thing for everyone, that is young, that is thinking about their future. You know, first of all, take your time and do what you love and find your passions and pursue your passions. If your passions are sports, then pursue a career in that, but do what's going to make you happy because, there's a lot of people out there that are doing jobs that are miserable and, they may not be making a lot of money either, but they're just miserable. And I think it's important to focus on what path is for you and not compare yourself to other people.
Yeah. No, that's huge. Everyone's on their own path, and comparison's the thief of joy. But yeah, so that will wrap
Good
up
saying.
this episode here. We are going to continue the interview with Paula in the next segment, so we'll be uploading that shortly. Thank you guys for your time. Any final comments?
Nope. Good.
Thanks for listening.
So
Thank you. Yes, for
we will
sure.
see you guys next time.